You're listening to Girls with Grafts, a burn community podcast created by Phoenix Society for Burn Survivors, a leading nonprofit dedicated to supporting the burn community. In this podcast, we'll talk with burn survivors, share resources to help with supporting and improving burn recovery, and discuss how to prevent burn injuries. Here are your hosts, burn survivors and Phoenix Society's marketing team, Amber Wilcox and Rachel Kudlak.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Girls with Grafts. I am Rachel Kudlak, and I'm one of the hosts of the show. And today I will not be joined by my lovely co-host, Amber Wilcox. We're actually doing things a little bit different today. We're switching it up for the first episode of Season 8 of Girls with Grafts. I truly can't believe we're already here so many episodes later in Season 8. It's a new year, new season, and we're starting it off a little bit differently. So I'm actually going to pass things over to Phoenix Society's CEO, Amy Acton, to moderate today's conversation. So as many of you are likely already aware, over the holidays, there was a large bar fire in Switzerland, and we wanted to come together today, bring in some experts and survivors to really have a timely and important conversation around fire advocacy and prevention. You know, Phoenix Society and the larger burn survivor community are, deeply saddened by the tragic fires and events that happened in Switzerland. And we're keeping all of those impacted along with the fire service and burn care professionals who are, helping survivors and, the healing. We're keeping all those folks in our thoughts. So, today's podcast is really just a reminder of our commitment to adding the survivor voices and working alongside our fire prevention partners to advocate for fire and life safety standards. Especially after such a devastating loss of life and burn injuries, we want to help ensure that those recovering from these injuries, along with their families and the community, have access to the necessary support and resources as they recover physically and emotionally from that trauma. So without further ado, I just want to quickly thank today's podcast partner. And today's podcast is powered by the National Fire Protection Association. NFPA is a nonprofit that seeks to save lives and reduce loss with information, knowledge, and passion. And you can learn more about fire safety and explore all of their educational resources by visiting nfpa.org. And our first guest is someone who knows all about NFPA, and that is Lorraine Carli. Lorraine joined NFPA in 2006 and serves as Vice President of Outreach and Advocacy at NFPA, overseeing media, public affairs, government affairs, advocacy, wildfire initiatives, and public education. And Lorraine is also a former board member and president of Phoenix Society for Burn Survivors. Our next guest is Rob Feeney, who is a survivor of the Station Nightclub Fire and a dedicated fire safety advocate. He is a trained Phoenix SOAR peer supporter and Phoenix advocate, and in 2013, he received the Phoenix Society Advocacy Award for his work on fire sprinkler legislation. And our final guest is Gina Russo, who is also a survivor of the Station Nightclub Fire and a Phoenix SOAR peer supporter. Gina is passionate about helping new survivors navigate recovery and rediscover life beyond trauma. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to them to get today's conversation started.
Well, thank you, Rachel, for kind of leading into this very important conversation. I think all of us since New Year's Eve have been having everybody in Switzerland on our hearts and minds. And so we wanted to kind of gather this group of individuals that have personal lived experience with something very similar. So I'm really grateful, first of all, Gina and Rob, for you joining us today and kind of sharing your lived experience on a very similar tragic fire. So I really want to start out with kind of, and this isn't the first time that something similar has happened to Rhode Island. Can you talk about what that is like to have that happen again And when you wake up to find that, how does that impact you in your own recovery?
Gina,
you want to go first?
Sure. Waking up that morning and hearing that pretty much it mirrored what happened 23 years ago for us. It was heartbreaking. And for me, more of it was the age group. These children, their lives have been turned upside down, all because someone thinks it's really cool to use pyrotechnics in a building. And it's just heartbreaking. The fact that no one pays attention when they're in that moment, to realize that there's a problem, like it's a big issue, and go about still dancing and moving but the place is on fire. It was very difficult, very, very difficult, and angry. I definitely got angry because it's happening again, and we've worked so hard, I thought, to help prevent it from happening again.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think when I first heard about it, because being the fire service, I have a lot of alerts from specific types of fires and large casualty events worldwide. So I saw the alert and I started following it, and they were still on scene of it. So the true amount of deaths and injuries weren't known yet. It just said many people were trapped. So I was kind of following it a lot, and I was just angry because I was just my first thought was just anger. I'm like, how many times does it have to happen? And it's happened several times in 2024 worldwide. And some people, they might want to say, oh, well, they're third world countries, or they don't have the technology. They don't, and that's a load of crap. They do. And everyone gets news around the world from other countries. Everyone knows when these big tragedies happen. And just the fact that people aren't listening, whether that's government officials, inspectors, patrons, I don't care who you are, people are not listening. And they do have that "it's not going to happen to me" mindset. That is, with all the advocacy that we've done here in the United States, to see it happen anywhere, it's sickening. And it's heartbreaking, and it's like, why are we doing this? And it doesn't have to be in Rhode Island again, or in Oakland, or anywhere in the United States. Seeing it anywhere, it's like, why are we doing this if people aren't listening?
Yeah. How about you, Lorraine, from your perspective at NFPA?
Yeah, and to wake up on a New Year's Day and be faced with a media inquiry about something like this, and then dig through it a little bit and see the scenario unfolding, my first reaction was, oh my gosh, this is Station Nightclub. Because one of the first videos I saw was from somebody in the building, and it was the shot of the ceiling with that egg carton soundproof material. And I said, oh my gosh, this is Station all over again. And then had the same feelings that Rob and Gina talked about: anger, disappointment, because these things are preventable. It's not like we don't know how to prevent this. And the other piece, Gina, when you talked about these young kids there and how many stayed in the building with their cell phones on, recording videos, and there was somebody trying to put the fire out with their shirt. It's like the lack of maybe understanding or knowledge of what to do, and how sad a scenario that we unfortunately keep revisiting in places all across the globe, when we have the knowledge and information and technology to be able to prevent these things. We just have to get better at learning these lessons, because we don't seem to learn from one of these tragedies. We may learn for a short period of time, but those memories, unfortunately, are short for some people. And for folks like you, Gina and Rob, those memories are long. And how do we capitalize on the knowledge that you have to prevent it from happening in the future?
Yeah, I'm right there with you guys. I mean, I think from being in this role and walking alongside those in Rhode Island and working at NFPA, it's maddening. It's just so frustrating and maddening and just all of the impact that this had, and realizing that. I mean, we're 7, 8 days out now, and that road is just starting for so many people. So there's the prevention side, but then there's this understanding and knowledge of how long that recovery cycle is, and we're long moved on from that moment. So I think for me it was remembering the moment of walking into the car disaster site that they set up in Rhode Island with a board member and saying, "Hey, we're here if you need us when you're ready." And just seeing the mass of resources pulled together in Rhode Island that tried to respond immediately to that fire, and just reflecting on all of that and remembering all of those stages and phases in 23 years almost later, the reality that the two of you are still very much part of this community, both healing and giving now, but still a very big part in the solution. It's a long road. So I think, Lorraine, you hit on it. It is, how do we bring all of these voices together, united in a message around educating the general public, these young kids, it goes back to public education. There's codes and standards. We have the tools and the knowledge and the technology, but we have a lot of different people working the problem. And so I might kind of get out of order a little bit here, but Lorraine, can you talk about the ecosystem for a minute? And kind of, I think that helps us kind of frame the conversation around the prevention side, at least.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when these things happen, the kinds of questions that we get are what went wrong, and everybody wants to look at one simple thing that might have happened. But what we know in all of these cases, it usually isn't one thing. It's usually a breakdown, maybe of one thing, but other things that play into it. So probably about 4 or 5 years ago, maybe a little longer now, NFPA developed something that's called the NFPA Fire and Life Safety Ecosystem. And really what it does is talk about that you need a system of safety working together to prevent these tragedies. And it's everything from the use and enforcement of the latest codes and standards to effective emergency response and planning, to that public education component. So all of these pieces have to work together, because when you see one of them fail, you typically are going to end up with a catastrophic event like these. And then as you look at it, you do find that it wasn't just one simple thing. There were a bunch of things that unfortunately came together to create the tragic event. And again, all of these being preventable. So that ability to take a step back and look at these things from a systemic approach versus, oh, well, they didn't have the right exits. Well, there was a whole bunch of things going on here that contributed to this, like we see so many times in these tragic events.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's similar to the back end of the tragedy.
Yeah.
The care it's similar. There's not one way or one piece of the recovery that can be taken in isolation, whether it's the acute. Right now, we're very focused on acute care of those injured, and we've been working as a community really long and hard to help people see that it goes on much longer than that, and there are chronic issues that we're dealing with. So unfortunately, it takes sometimes a tragedy to move that needle forward, another jump and another hop. So I think for my sanity, I've always said, okay, we're not going to get all the way to the end, but we're going to take this and do another step forward in prevention and in care. And what are those things that we can do that make a difference? And as we transition from that question, Gina and Rob, can you talk a little bit about kind of some of those key milestones for you from the early days to maybe where you are today, kind of some of those key things that made a difference in your recovery that kind of helped you move that next step forward, that you had access to, whether it's good quality acute care or whatever. Can you talk a little bit about that for you?
Amy, My bit of story of and how I came to know about the Phoenix Society. I think I was awake from a coma within like an hour. I had family members telling me that there was this man, Frank McGonigal, and there was this other guy, George Passati, and there's this whole organization called the Phoenix Society. I count myself so blessed to have, I guess, been injured when I was, because your organization, the organization was really coming to life, and people were hearing about it. We've met so many first timers and people they're 30, 40, 50 years out of their burn, and they're just finding out that Phoenix Society exists. So for me, it was knowing that this support was right there. I had wonderful care at Shriners Children's and Mass General and Spalding, and without the support of my family, but it was Phoenix Society that truly showed me I could probably live through this and live well. And hopefully when anybody that's affected by a fire injury, when they're ready, they'll look and they'll see, or someone will have already told them this community exists, because it's essential to have this, that they'll have a place to go to, even if they don't want to tell their story just yet, but to know they're not alone. It's just vital in the recovery of all of this to know that you're not the only one. It really saved my life. In 2004, when I went to my first World Burn Congress, it just opened my eyes to a lot of things. But then you also learn a lot about fire safety and, along your journey. And this really could have been prevented, and every other one after it's all preventable. It really is.
Yeah, I think for me, I just lucked out in so many areas with the care I had at Rhode Island Hospital. Even though they didn't have a burn unit, they just had doctors that knew what to do, and they brought in people who knew what to do. And my nurse from Nebraska, and that right there was the first step, having the initial care. Getting out, I was lost, because I waking out of the coma and finding out everything that happened, and finding out life as I knew it ended, and starting from scratch. And I'm not even out of the hospital yet. And you don't want to leave the hospital now. Now it's all right. This is my comfort zone. Staying here for as long as I can, and then they kick you out, and it's like, great. Square one again. I just had another square one, and it's very difficult. I think going right into the physical therapy, occupational therapy, visiting nurses, and again, lucking out to have fantastic people to care for me. I had an OT who, while he was training in college for occupational therapy, his roommate had burnt his hands, and immediately started specializing in hand injury and burns. My visiting nurse was just phenomenal. We became very good friends, and it was more like a friend coming over twice a day than it was a nurse coming over very quickly. And it was, not to say she wasn't professional, but we put a lot of the professional stuff aside and just had some great conversations, which I think help her understand how to care for me, and it built that trust that I had for her to care for me. And that was huge. Having Kathy Sullivan on Pelchat now, being a survivor from my group at the station, get me connected with Frank McGonigal and Phoenix Society was enormous. It's like I lucked out that, having the connection with Kathy and then building onto everything else. If I didn't have that, I think I still would have been wandering around on square one in a lot of areas. And, my first world burn 7 months after the station fire was scary. I didn't feel like I belonged. And it took a few days, and talking to Charlene Pell and making that connection with a peer was vital. That opened up so much more. And, I think have use is very important because people can rate the need.
Mhm.
Thank you, guys. And I think some of what you're talking about is that kind of early process and just the physical recovery and kind of coming out of this fog, if you will. Gina hit kind of the longer term kind of recovery and peace, and both of you have been, I would call, leaders in the advocacy realm. And can you talk about what that meant to you to be a vocal advocate, whether it's for the memorial, Gina? I know without you, the memorial probably wouldn't have been built in Rhode Island. But talk a little bit about kind of that the self-focus to looking at the bigger picture and that advocacy role and what that meant to you, and some of the different things you've done along the way. I know some of you've been involved with, Common Voices and NFPA, Faces of Fire. So talk a little bit about that for us.
I knew probably about 8 months after that I had to find a way to get back to my new life. But I had to live well for the doctors, for my family that all suffered while I was going through all of this. Then it got to a point I started to talk to survivors of the fire. I hadn't really met anybody, but chit-chatting through computer venues. I knew that somehow I had to become active. I didn't know when that was going to be. But for me, it had always been about remembering the 100 who passed away, especially losing someone, as unfortunately Rob and I have experienced the same thing. My goal was to make sure that they were never forgotten. And that was, building that memorial was just a mission, to make sure that they were always memorialized. Even when, we were in and out of courts with the people who were accused, I remember standing in one of those courtrooms and I looked at a judge and I said, I promise you'll never forget me, because I will make sure that everybody remembers them. And it's just became a goal. So I was proud when we were able to open up that park to give that back to the families. It's changed my life in a lot of ways. I've done things that I never thought I would do. Writing the book, it was really just for therapeutic purposes, but it went on to a different scale and opened up my world even more. Being able to, travel and talk to different groups about what happened that night. Not just so much the tragedy piece of it, because we all know it happened, but what life is like afterwards. Because if you're lucky enough to survive it, you have to find a way to live well, because we're so blessed to still be here. In my world, it was always 100 people didn't get to live. So I have to live well. And, I'm grateful for the life that I have. It's been a very long road. It does not happen the day you get discharged, because when you do get discharged, you're begging someone to drive you right back to that hospital. That is truly your comfort zone and your safety net. But it was the support systems that were in place that every year I just felt better and better. Going back to my job, when they told me I probably wouldn't work again, driving a car again, huge milestones after you've lived through something like this. But it is possible as long as you're putting in the work. The physical and occupational therapy, it's vital, and even the mental support. I do get much more out of the peer support groups than I did out of the actual doctors, psychiatrists, and psychologists. They're wonderful, absolutely. But I definitely got way more out of talking to a peer supporter than I did on that doctor level. So I'm proud to be a part of that, the SOAR program, and being able to help new survivors. And I just want to continue. I just want to stay on this road. And I'm determined at some point someone's going to get it. And they're going to say, okay, we probably shouldn't, no fire in a building. I'm going to keep trying.
Lorraine, any comments from you of just kind of, again, I think incidents like this, you get called immediately, usually. But kind of these larger disaster type events and how they compound what is a typical role, like a what you're describing of your recovery is not unlike mine as a burn survivor, but there are compounding things for you that you've had to deal with, the media, legal, all of those things. Can you talk, Lorraine, a little bit about from NFPA's perspective of kind of the single fire, which is also something we're trying to prevent because many people die every year in single family homes, and there are solutions there too. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. And, I'm really struck by both Rob and Gina's comments about, the desire to continue with their advocacy, because I can't underscore enough how important that is. When something like this happens, we all get incredibly frustrated and angry and disappointed with some of the words that we use. But the reality is, in my optimistic view, is because of the voice of the survivor, we have made progress. We are just not going to know the things that never happened because somebody heard that message and did something different. Whether they did something as an individual or they did something as a business owner or a policymaker. But we just need to multiply that. And because we are living in a time where complacency has kind of taken over. We've had fewer fires in the last few decades, so people don't think it's necessarily going to happen to them. We've got a lot of other distractions in life and politics and everything else. And fire safety is unfortunately taking a back seat, and people are ignoring it, taking it for granted, thinking somebody else is taking care of it. So that voice of survivor is incredibly important to bring that perspective, because it is so personal to those folks that are involved in it. It's so personal to every single person at NFPA and at the Phoenix Society and all of these other organizations that we deal with. And we have to figure out what's that multiplying impact that we can have to make sure that our voices are rising above all of this other stuff that people are hearing. But you're right, Amy, fire in general is still a problem, and people take that for granted. So we need to keep moving ahead, because part of the reality is when codes and standards work, you don't hear about them. They're invisible. They're just in the building, built properly, managed properly, enforced properly, and they're working, doing their job. It's when we see these things that they are very painful reminders that not everybody is paying attention to safety the way that they should be.
Yeah.
NFPA just recently came out with a campaign last year called Safety Doesn't Happen by Chance. And that's the reality. It happens because codes and standards are developed by private independent organizations. It happens when they're enforced properly. It happens when people take responsibility for their own safety. We talk about the nightclub scenario, as Rob mentioned at the beginning. There was Coconut Grove a long time ago. There was some in between. There was Station Nightclub. There's been a whole host of them since that time. And part of that is, if you're going into a nightclub, are you thinking about, how do I get out if something happens? Are there too many people in here? Are they using pyrotechnics? And so there is a huge public education component. So when these things happen, NFPA tries to look at it from all sides and use it as a teachable moment with our partners to say, what more can we do to prevent future incidents like this occurring?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think memories are short. And so it's a repeatable and consistent message. You have to hear it so many times to get it. And I can attest that the station fire definitely changed my behavior. And when I go into a building, and I know it changed my families. So I think there is this ripple effect in prevention. There's also a ripple effect in the trauma and how far that goes out. And I know in Rhode Island, when we had World Burn twice since the station fire, every cab driver I got into, I knew so-and-so. Everybody in that community was impacted by that fire, the whole state. Yeah. We did a training for all of the mental health care providers in the state so they would understand some of the long-term needs. Rhode Island's small enough we could do that, but I think it's such a long ripple and long tale of recovery. So what I wanted to go back to though is Rob, when it works, when that survivor voice makes a difference, can you, and I know Gina, you said something to me last week when we were talking about this, about the local effort and what you need to do to maintain that. So can you both talk about kind of some moments that you've made a difference with your story? Because I know they're there. Rob, you're having, I think Rob's having a little problem. It might be your earbuds or something, but you're kind of going in and out. So we need to fix that, I think.
Can you hear me now?
It's a little rough. So you might, why don't we go with Gina and maybe take these out and go without them?
Yep.
Yeah, sure. Lots of what I've done to try to help people remember, one was building the memorial so they wouldn't forget. But anytime that I've been in a building and I see that something's not right, I don't hesitate to go find someone. I've even called our local fire marshal's office because people acted like, no, it's no big deal. What do you care? You know, I do care because my family's in there, my children, you know, they're gonna go visit that place, and I have to know they're safe. So I will always be vocal about it. Maybe people don't like it, but that's not my problem. That's a them problem. No one likes to be called out on something that they know is really wrong, but it brings in the extra money. And I just don't understand that. I cannot wrap my head around, why do we need all this fanfare or this spectacular stuff to have a good time? You know, I just still can't, I don't understand every time I hear about another fire and there were pyrotechnics in a building, or very recently there was a home that literally blew up because they had fireworks stored in the garage.
Yeah.
So I think what we do is important, and I will continue to do it. And part of it also is making sure survivors know that we're around and we're here for them, and we're fighting for it to try to prevent it from happening again. We're going to do everything we can, but it's been vital for me to be able to do that. Whether people would like me to not say so much, especially in my town in Rhode Island, they all wish it would kind of just go away. There are still people who would love to bring back this grandfather law that was in Rhode Island. You know, they don't want to pay the money to put the sprinklers in, or no, I'm sorry, that's going to stay right where it is, and you're going to do what needs to be done. Just important for me to continue down that path because my family or my friends are going to be in that building someday.
Yeah, building codes change, right? And people try to pull things out all the time. And so we're constantly working with our partner to say, hey, can you go to this hearing, or can you do this, because they're trying to pull out the electrical code or whatever it might be. So that is a really important piece of staying attuned to what's happening in your own backyard. Rob, why don't you share your story if we get you back?
Hopefully you hear me now.
Yep.
Yeah, the advocacy side, and I never expected to be an advocate. I didn't think I was qualified to be one. It really started one day. It was actually before my first world burn, when Governor Romney had a task force in Massachusetts to see if they needed to do something about nightclub safety. Just in Massachusetts alone. I know Rhode Island was working on theirs. And my cousin was in the fire service, and he asked if I would speak down in Hyannis at the third and final meeting of this task force to gather information for Governor Romney. So I went down and I spoke on my life, and this was May 4th, 2003. So it was how my life was for a few months since the station fire. And it was tough with the legal constraints of what I could say, because there was still an ongoing criminal investigation. But I said enough that immediately the governor was like, no, we're putting sprinklers in every nightclub, retrofitting, you have a date to do it, or you're closing down. and he was just very strict about it. I didn't think anything at the time, like what kind of impact this would have in the long run. It had a positive and negative impact. I was kind of public enemy number one on a lot of talk shows and newspapers, and who's this kid? He's getting bought off, to come out here and speak against the builders and everything else. And I'm like, okay, game on now. So I didn't like that side of it, because I'm like, who are they to tell me I'm being paid for my story? I'm not. I'm talking because it shouldn't have happened, and it's going to happen again. And it just fed this need that I just want to keep speaking. And it took several years for me to really get involved in the true advocacy. And when I was asked to go down to Chattanooga, because they were having trouble passing a sprinkler law, so I testified there, and it passed by one vote because of my testimony. So that showed me the power of someone's story, and just my voice alone telling what I went through, that it can happen and will happen to you if you are not smart about enacting the right codes and the right laws. And that just really snowballed into going to Capitol Hill and fighting for the sprinkler incentive and the tax law. And we're still fighting here in Massachusetts because they refuse to adopt the sprinkler code and the building code. And it's international. It's in the International Builders Code. Which means every country that has the International Builders Code should have the sprinkler law. And that's the first thing that's pulled out of it. And it needs to stop. And it won't stop if we stop talking.
Yeah. And it's a minimum, it's a minimum standard. That's a minimum standard of safety that they're pulling out. It's not like it's over the top safety. So, yeah, and I think the collaboration is a key point in what you just shared too. Working with the industries that are out there. People say, well, it's just because they want to put their sprinklers or they want to put their smoke alarms in there. Well, yeah, you also put very fancy countertops in your home, and but this saves your life. So I think that there is this kind of misconception that it's all about just profit for them. But if we were able, and we haven't yet, but we were going to continue to work on it, talk about the cost of each of your recoveries for the last 23 years and add that to the cost that we're talking about. That's where we need to get to, because we often tend to talk about the people who have passed and died, which we don't ever want to forget. And that's a huge cost. But there's an additional cost of those that are injured and living with a significant burn injury, and their families, and the impact on their mental health and all of that. So we have to continue to be better at sharing those costs. And that's what the testimonies are doing, at least, is bringing that forward in a real human way on the human cost. But there's also a big financial cost there that we need to work with our burn care partners to have. So, the work with the Common Voices and identifying survivors that could help tell that story on Capitol Hill. And, for the last, 15, 20 years, we went there to try to get that took a long time. And we all got very discouraged about that. Now it is, how do we get business owners to take the benefit of that tax incentive and actually put sprinklers in their buildings? So anyways, I think there is a long-lasting impact you've already had and will continue to have by sharing your story and your life and the impact that your fire had. And as we think of those in Switzerland and the impact in that community, I think for us it is about just being present and sharing lessons learned, and continuing to connect the dots and with people to help in any way we can. So I think again, I'm gonna open it up for any final kind of comments you all have about, again, reflecting on another fire that's just happened.
Yeah, and I would first want to make a comment to Rob because I was just telling somebody the story the other day of Rob testifying in Tennessee when they said to him, "You have 2 or 3 minutes to make your case." And he said, "Okay, that's how long it took for 100 people to die in the Station Nightclub Fire." That sticks with me, and I've heard you do that presentation a number of times. That is so incredibly powerful, and I just really appreciate the fact that you have stepped up to become an advocate, and you as well, Gina, and share those stories because they are saving lives, they're saving property, they're making progress, but we do have more to go. So in terms of kind of that final wrap up, we do live in a time where people are taking safety for granted, and we need to redouble our efforts to make sure that they're paying attention to codes and standards and public education and all of the things that got us to this level of safety, because without it, we are creating greater risk for more of these tragedies to occur in the future. And the sadness of all of that is the folks that die in these fires. It's the tragedy that we could have prevented them. So keeping kind of our eye on the outcomes for this is that we have that information, knowledge, and technology to be able to save more lives, more property from fire. And if we all work together, we can make more progress. It does take time, Amy, you're right.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But we can't give up. There's just too much at stake.
Yeah.
There is. I think also, I don't know, we maybe talked about a little bit what I think is super important, and it did come out of the station fire. I don't know that everybody's jumped on board with it, but it was crowd management, teaching the people who work in these bars, restaurants, how to handle a situation, whether it's a fire, a fight. Like, I mean, we live in a world of mass shootings now, educating them even a little bit. Okay, those are the exits. If something happens, let's try to keep people as calm as possible. That program I felt like was so important. And I was really proud and happy to work with one of the people who helped bring it to life. And we've done a lot of, him and I have done a lot of speaking together about it, because it really is important that you get hired for a job and you're working with the public, and I'm going to try, like, we trust, okay, these people know what they're doing. Let's take it that little step further and make sure that they are educated, that fire, exits shouldn't be blocked, and there shouldn't be plants in front of doorways. So I really, truly believe if we could get that out there a little bit more into the world, about crowd management, it might help a bit. It's just one of those other things that I think might help a little bit along the way.
Crowd management is important. Being in the fire service now and having done inspections and code enforcement, that's one of the things in Massachusetts we've been doing. And I know in my district, any new restaurant, bar, anything that opens up, every annual inspection, we're checking their crowd management certificates, making sure new employees have them, even if they're not a bouncer. It's like we encourage them and tell them, we want anyone in here. You're going to have a DJ for karaoke night, to anything that's entertainment, we're going to push you for a crowd management certificate so everybody's in train. Like, God forbid something stupid happens in here and there's a panic, then anything can happen that's going to cause a mass casualty event outside of a fire, even though we're focusing on fires for most of it. For me, the public education side, we're hammering the business owners on codes and legislatures and inspectors and everyone on the codes. And that's going to be a forever fight, unfortunately, until we get the right people to listen. Educating the public, and what I've been doing as an advocate, most of my audiences with public speaking have been in the fire service, and I've been starting to get outside of I'm still doing that, but I've been focusing a little bit on the high school students, the kids, the seniors, going into college, getting out of their parents' house, everything from off-campus housing to nightclub safety. And I'm trying to drill in the situational awareness. If you're in a group, make sure you know where your friends are. If you're going to be out drinking, it's like, I'm not your parent. I cannot preach to someone not to do something that I've done all of it and I enjoyed it. And it's like, hey, you know what? I had a hell of a lot of fun. I did a lot of stupid things. I survived, but I probably, because I had the right people around me to make sure I did survive.
Mm-hmm.
Go out and have fun, but do it safely, because the place that you're going is not there for your safety. They might say it, but they don't care. They're charging you at the door. They're charging you for everything you touch inside there, drinks, food, entertainment. No matter what it is, they're in it for the money. They don't care if you come back again. Someone else is going to replace your spot at that bar or standing on that damn floor. You're responsible for your own safety. And I try to tell these 18, 19-year-olds, keep your head on a swivel. And I want them to have goosebumps and hair standing up in their arms when I'm talking to them of the reality of how quickly they could die when they leave the house.
Mm-hmm.
And they want to go out and have fun. I don't sugarcoat a thing. I'm like, you guys are adults now. You can handle this. And I've had quite a few of them in the last 3 years I've met afterwards, or a couple of actually getting into the fire service. And they've thanked me and they said, I'm doing this now because I saw you talk, and I went away to college in another state and I couldn't believe the condition of some of the bars. I'm transferring colleges because I don't feel safe in that community because they don't care about their customers. And I'm getting that kind of feedback. And I might have spoken to 500 students and only had 5 or 6 of them talk to me, but that's 5 or 6 lives that are saved, 5 or 6 that are going to carry that over to their family and their friends. And it just snowballs in that direction, that I have people now talking about safety at that young age. And I think that is a huge area that has to be targeted.
Well, and I think amplifying our voices, and one of the things the Phoenix Society will continue to do is try to convene and connect the survivors to those opportunities. And we are going to bring back our advocacy training that's on the docket for this year to be able to do that virtually, to help people kind of how to tell your story with purpose and advocacy, because there is some differences of open mic compared to, trying to tell your story for advocacy. And also, I think the ability to work with partners like NFPA's campaign. Imagine if we had everybody that was connected to Phoenix Society promoting that campaign. And I'm going to be the first one to say I need to be doing that more. And so Lorraine will make sure we put that information in wherever Rachel will put them. So people can become part of that campaign and really use those tools that are really great to advocate for codes and standards, which are under threat in our country. And so we need to continue to step up as a community and get engaged in that way. And then be ready and supportive of the long recovery of those in Switzerland. And, I was thinking about the time, it was the 10-year anniversary, I think, at World Burn, that we invited representatives from the Kiss Night Fire. That was relatively soon. FM Global helped us connect those dots. I went to Brazil and testified about the impact and the long-term needs of the community. So there is a way to connect these dots and get even stronger in our message and our voice. So thank you all for being part of this conversation. We'll continue to be there and be thinking of all in Switzerland and the care providers that are working very hard right now to save more lives, I'm sure, and their families will be present and keeping them in our hearts. So thank you for your conversation today. It was very meaningful, and I appreciate you all.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much.
Thank you.
And I just want to give a quick thank you to Amy, Lorraine, Gina, and Rob for recording today's episode. I know it was a little bit different for our first episode of season 8 of Girls with Grafts, but we so appreciate their time and effort and quickness in getting today's podcast recorded. So thank you to them so much, and we will see you in the next episode. Bye.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of Girls with Grafts. If you are enjoying this content, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. This helps others find the show, and we greatly appreciate it. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.